good evening. Um, we just did a live stream on the other channel. It was very, very quiet, but let's see what's happening in the sports world. Obviously, Novak Djokovic and his deportation from Australia. Obviously, what does that mean for Djokovic? His career going forward. He's in his mid-30s. How many more, uh, Grand Slams does he play in? Southampton Man City has just ended 1-1 as a full-time score. So that is very, very interesting. And that's the first time that Man City have dropped points in 13 games. So that's very, very interesting. What else is going on? Obviously, you've got the political, diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics at Beijing, which is obviously coming up in a couple of weeks' time as the Winter Olympics start in Beijing. And that's an interesting subplot. Newcastle get their first win under Eddie Howe. So the battle to avoid relegation in the Premier League is really hot, hotting up in the last couple of weeks with Norwich and Newcastle their form starting to improve. Watford being dragged in, but Everton, I think, are the team most vulnerable. I think to dropping into the relegation scrap. I generally do. Whereas Brentford and Leeds have had poor form recently, Everton are in real crisis and are really struggling. And they lose again. Duncan Ferguson is interim boss. There's a lot of managers being linked with the job. But after the Ronald Koeman sacking a few years ago and then finding a replacement and the mess that was, and how the ownership handled replacing Koeman with via Unsworth and Sam Allardyce, and then you end up down the line with Silva and then Ancelotti and then Benitez. The lack of managerial stability at Everton is part of the problem. And then there's going to be question marks over Jordan Pickford and his position as England's number one with the World Cup on the horizon. Will he stay at Everton? Will he stay as England's number one? Also in the tennis, there are no British players left in the Australian Open singles competition in both men's and women's. So that's not good if you are a British tennis fan. But the Djokovic situation, I think, for me, is possibly the most important. How does this affect the rest of his career? Will the French allowed to play at the French Open? Will we allowed to play at Wimbledon? Will he be allowed to play at the US Open? Will he attempt to play at the Australian Open next year? Should he, still be playing? Will he break that Grand Slam winning record? He is the best tennis player, I think, of his generation, not of all time. I think he's better than Federer. He's better than Nadal, in my opinion. But he's 34 now. How long does he have left in the sport? And how does this, the Australian Open debacle impact him going forward? What will the results of his deportation and his visa being, rejected by the Australian government? What does that actually mean? What does that mean for Novak Djokovic? What does that mean for him as a player? And does that set a precedent, not only in tennis, but in other sports about vaccinations of athletes and appearing at competitions? With the current climate with COVID, what does that mean, for vaccination status while we still have this COVID situation going on? What does that mean? Well, it's going to be interesting. We'll have to see how it plays out. Obviously, that means we're going to have a new name, I believe, on the Australian Open Championship. A new Grand Slam winner, in my opinion. Although Del Potro's won one, Chilich has won a Grand Slam, and they're still in the competition. So, could we have one of them win a second Grand Slam? Could we honestly have a brand new winner who's never won before? We've got Stan Wawrinka in there who's won a few. Um, but yeah, what does this mean? Does this mean that at some point, um, in the let's have a look at live chat, please. Um, you know, is this a changing of the guard in men's tennis with the old like Djokovic's, the Federers, the Nadals, Andy Murray's is near the end of his career now. Injuries are done for him. Does this mean there's going to be a changing of the guard in men's tennis? Does this mean we're going to have new names appearing on Grand Slams and the other singles tournaments? Are we going to enter a new era of tennis because of the last 2 decades been dominated by 3 to 4 players predominantly? Um, is this era of a handful of players dominating coming to an end? And has the COVID pandemic sped that up? Um, that's an interesting conversation to have. So the Djokovic situation is, I think, very, very, very interesting in regards to what tennis looks like in the next 12 months to 2 years. Could you know could we have seen the last of Novak Djokovic play? That's a general question. Could this be the last time we have had the opportunity to watch Novak Djokovic play? We will see what happens in regards to the French Open, Wimbledon, and the US Open at Indian Wells. We will see how that plays out and how Australia denying him entry on his visa, how that affects his career going forward. So yeah, there are things I think to ponder. In regards to Everton's hunt for a new manager and Man United's hunt for a new manager, that's interesting as well. Again, neither club has named a permanent successor. Although Man United, I think, will very likely leave that until the summer. But in Everton's case, they need change now. They absolutely need change now because that squad is not good enough. There's only 7 days left of the transfer window, if that, 8 days left. No permanent manager in place. Another defeat. So performances haven't changed even with Ferguson, Duncan Ferguson in as interim. But they tried it with Unsworth as well as interim manager after Coman's sacking, and that didn't work out well either a few years back, 3-4 years ago. So Everton are in trouble. And I honestly believe that they could be the third side to get relegated. I generally believe Newcastle and Norwich can get out of the situation, and I believe Everton will get sucked in. I generally believe that's going to be the outcome of this season. And people will say, well, look back at the Nottingham Forest 20 odd years ago. They were too big to go down. They went down, and people were saying, "Nah, this club won't get relegated. They'll figure a way out of it." And lo and behold, they didn't, and they had a shocking season. I think, yeah, there's definite cause for concern. I think Burnley are in trouble as well, quite frankly. Yeah, I generally think Watford are in trouble. I think Leeds are slipping and looking at the precipice themselves. And some other clubs are also out of form right now. And while they've got a fair buffer over the drop zone, they're not safe yet. Even with Burnley's games in hand, I don't think they get out of trouble. I think Sean Dyche, I think, has taken that club as far as he can with the budget he's got. I think Burnley's Premier League tail this time around is run. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think more clubs are going to get sucked into the battle for survival. At the other end of the table, obviously Man City's winning run comes to an end. They've dropped points against Southampton. So there are, as I say, the weaknesses have been exposed. Now, Southampton didn't take full advantage of beating Man City, but I think it says to me that Man City do have weaknesses. They have been exposed. And unfortunately, Southampton just couldn't get over the line. Didn't have enough quality to beat them. They let Man City back into the game in the second half. Man United have been scraping some wins, unconvincing wins, but they've been scraping wins. So Man United are starting to pick up points again, which is interesting. And what is going to be interesting to see is who Everton appoint as manager. Good evening. Yes, I had a live stream on the other channel. It was just basically rambling on for an hour and a half about politics, current affairs, some video game news, and obviously I discussed The Witcher briefly. Good evening. How is it going? Hope all is well. But yes, Aston Villa handing Everton yet another defeat. Man United scraping a win. West Ham losing again, I think, is very, very interesting as well. But Everton, I think, is one of the big stories because Newcastle and Norwich have started to pick up points, and Everton are not picking up points, and they are plummeting, and they are in serious trouble of getting sucked into the relegation battle more. No permanent managerial replacement. Middle of the transfer window, still not making any more signings. I don't think the squad's good enough. So it's going to be interesting to see what plays out with Everton. They are in serious trouble. Fans were were venting their frustration. Of course, you're a Birmingham City fan, if I remember correctly. Blackburn play Middlesbrough on Monday, but we lost a shock defeat to Hull. But then Hull backed that up by beating Bournemouth today, and Bournemouth, Fulham. It's now Fulham's championship to lose in the championship. They're in a similar position to Man City, with a bit of a gap, a 12-point gap, and they've already hit 70 points. So I don't think I think Fulham have already. Oh, they're already in 50 odd points. I think Fulham are running away with the championship, and I do honestly believe Fulham are going to give Man City a massive game with Man City in the FA Cup. What are my thoughts on Derby? Interesting one. There is an American family interested in buying the club. They have submitted a bid to the EFL to purchase the club. There are 3 bids on the table to purchase Derby, so there are interested buyers. And I don't think the EFL allow Derby to fail. I think the reason why they allowed Bury to fail is Bury had played no games in the 2019-2020 season at that point, while Bolton had. And so therefore, if Derby were to fail, it does actually affect the championship table will look like, because teams that have beaten them will lose those 3 points. Teams that have lost against them have those losses wiped off their record, and those teams that have drawn against Derby also lose those points. So that actually actively impacts the championship table should Derby fail mid-season. Now, obviously, Wycombe and Middlesbrough are still contesting, obviously legally. Obviously, Middlesbrough missing out on playoffs and Wycombe getting relegated because they believe honestly that the points deductions should have been put in earlier, which I think is a fair reflection. So that's a bad look for the EFL. Had the points deductions been put in before the end of last season, Derby were relegated and will be a League One team this season. So Wycombe, I think, have grounds. And I think Middlesbrough have grounds, and that's to do with Mel Morris, the previous owner, who still owns the stadium, by the way. So whoever buys the club is still going to have issues. In regards to them having a week to live, they're going to have to sell players, but they can't sign any replacements. They're going to have to, pump youth players into the team. I think if Wayne Rooney was to leave and go to Everton, that's Derby relegated anyway, even if they were to survive. So I think Wayne Rooney sticks it out, and I think they have a chance of actually staying up with Wayne Rooney remaining manager. But yes, they've got about 8 days to find funds to not run out of money. But the EFL is under a lot of criticism for their handling of not only the Bury situation, but every situation before that. Would they still survive had they gone down, though? That's a separate discussion. But bear in mind, they only got promotion a couple of seasons ago. So imagine this had been played out in the Premier League, should they have got there. Would have been disastrous. Um, the fact it's taking place in the Championship um, is just as bad. They are a high-profile club. This is not like a club that's just come out of the non-league and is just struggling to survive. This is a club that's been a Premier League team. This is a club that's been an old Division One pre-Premiership winner, the old Division One. So this is a team with a great history. It's won trophies before. It's been a Premier League side. Been a solid Championship side. It's basically a top two division side for most, if not all, of its existence. I think it's also a founder of the Football League as well. So it would make the EFL look very, very stupid if it were allowed to fail. But then it also raises questions about the fit and proper persons test, the EFL's rules, and their failure to actually apply their rules correctly to begin with. In regard to Mel Morris's ownership, it raises questions about the EFL itself, the situation. This is more than just a club being badly run. This raises questions about the EFL itself, but the same questions were being raised when Bury went out of business. And that was a bad look for the EFL, and it was a bad look for English football. And then the pandemic happens within, 6 months of that, 8 months of that, and football shuts down. And the warnings from clubs across the footballing pyramid this time last year that they were facing going out of business are now coming true. No, they don't want another Portsmouth, but again, that comes down to the fit and proper persons tests. This comes down to regularly auditing clubs on an annual basis to make sure they are complying. This comes down to weak governance, basically, and I'm going to just lie down like this because my back is killing me. Quite frankly, let me just make sure the lights. Quite frankly, yes, the Premier League doesn't want anything to do with it. I think the Premier League are glad that Derby didn't get promoted that season, quite frankly. But the EFL hasn't covered itself in glory for many years now in regards to club ownership rules. Neither has the Premier League, to be brutally honest, if we're being honest. And we can go back to, Portsmouth. We can go back to you can even ask questions of the Man City takeover all those years ago, and of course the Newcastle takeover, the double standards there, the delay on the Newcastle takeover. I honestly believe Rafa Benitez would still be Newcastle manager now had that takeover gone through back in 2017 when Amanda Staveley put her initial bid in. And the delay over the last 18 months has been a joke. It shows the double standards within the sport. Just get that right. There we go. Just get comfy. Oh. So yes, you could argue definitely that the Premier League doesn't want another Portsmouth, but the Premier League handled that badly as well. In fact, in my opinion, football in general has had weak governance now for years, years and years and years. And what I find really interesting is how the fact that only Macclesfield fell when they predicted a dozen at least is a miracle. Yes, Macclesfield did actually collapse post-season, however, so they were able to complete the season. Remember, that is very important. They were able to complete the Footballing League season, and so therefore it didn't overly impact the final league results. And this is why basically English football doesn't want to repeat what happened in Scottish football with Gretna. And we've seen this played out in other sports where a team goes bust and it actually affects the viability of leagues. We've seen it in ice hockey. We've seen it in rugby union with London Welsh. And now we're seeing it in football. Now, yes, I think the pandemic did contribute to Macclesfield's demise. Absolutely. But again, bad ownership contributes to that as well. It doesn't matter their position in the league pyramid. But yes, even well before the pandemic, we have seen clubs go bust. Hereford, Chester, Scarborough, to name but a few. I think Darlington as well, Rushden and Diamonds. So it's not a new thing that Macclesfield, for example, were the latest club to go bust. But Southend, we know, have got massive financial difficulties. And that's a known example that I know of. Dover Athletic in the non-league couldn't complete last season. Now, they weren't relegated from the National League, but they were heavily docked points because they were unable to fill their fixture list due to COVID. And yes, the fact that only one club, when about a dozen to about 20 were predicted to go bust, plus another 60 were in severe financial difficulty out of all 92 clubs from Man City at the top, all the way down to Scunthorpe United at the bottom of the Football League pyramid, plus a handful in the non-league that were in the Football League last season. About 2/3 were predicted to have financial difficulties, and out of that, about a quarter were predicted to go bust. Only one team going bust in the last 18 months to 2 years is, quite frankly, a miracle, but the warnings are there. And then there was someone on social media did a bit of research into the 135% loss over profits rule. And if the EFL and the Premier League were to properly enforce their own financial fair play rules, again, you're looking at about 2/3 of the clubs would be docked points if we're going by the rule book and they do not enforce it. So therefore, clubs just feel free to do what they want. But then you have to ask the question, so that's weak governance. But then you have to ask the question of the fit and proper persons test, the directors test. The fact that Mel Morris was allowed to take a controlling stake in the club shouldn't have happened. Now, I don't know enough about Derby's situation. What I do know is, there's a guy I work with whose sister-in-law's partner is actually working for the administrators that are dealing with Derby County. And I'm in the South England, so that just tells you something. And I don't think the EFL allow that to happen. However, the administrators have said we've got about 10 days worth of cash. Now, the transfer window is still open. Derby County have got a transfer embargo for signing new players unless they are under 21s or they're free agents. They cannot sign a player with a transfer fee. They can only use the loan system, give youth players senior contracts, and sign players who are off contract, who are basically free transfers, basically. That doesn't mean they can't sell players. So the only way I think Derby can survive is if they sell some players. And in theory, ironically, the only way they can survive financially is if Everton or Man United go, we want Wayne Rooney as our manager. We're going to sign his break clause in his contract with Derby. Much like Chelsea did with Lampard, it makes you wonder where that money has gone. I can see a little bit of semblance there. Yeah, Birmingham, Reading, and Derby have all had points deductions in the last couple of years, before and after COVID, obviously. Reading this season and Derby this season. Birmingham a couple of seasons ago, I think 2018, 2019, Birmingham were hit with a points deduction as well. I think I did a video on that. So yes, in the last 4 or 5 years, those clubs have been singled out for punishment from the FA and the Football League. But absolutely, if you were to do it by the book, the top 2 divisions, it depends on how you try and look at the expenditure over income rule. And on a 10-year snapshot, as a Blackburn fan, the initial time when we fell out of the Premier League and ended up in League One at one point, we were definitely overspending. Now we're in a good, healthy position, and the spending's calmed down. We're actually making money again. I remember Luton. I remember Boston United. Boston United had some creative accounting, however, that did for Boston United. They had some financial irregularities. That wasn't breaching financial fair play. That was them fiddling the books to make it look like they were healthier financially than what they were, and some money went missing. And I think there was some criminal investigations into Boston United. Sheffield Wednesday's been ongoing for donkeys. Similar situation to Portsmouth, because Milan Mandaric was involved in both clubs, and there's some question marks over the fact that he was even allowed to buy either of them, or have a controlling stake in either of them. And that's been ongoing for the best part of 2 decades, with Sheffield Wednesday having money problems. And they're not the only club. So, yes, if I want to go further back, you've got Chester City going out of business, Rushden and Diamonds, Scarborough, Darlington, Hereford United. Of course, we ended up at Bury as well. So there's definitely a lot of concerns that are in place that are long-standing issues. Then you look at rugby union, London Welsh, ice hockey, Manchester, the Manchester Phoenix, which was in the second division of British Ice, the second tier. But they go bust, then ended up destroying the league they played in because teams pulled out and then they had to restructure the complete league structure after that. And it did cause a knock-on effect for various issues. There was a knock-on effect in Manchester when ice hockey terms, there were two teams in Manchester, now there's one. And that had a knock-on impact. London Welsh, knock-on impact in rugby union. That's still being felt today, I honestly believe. And there are other, rugby league. We've had Widnes and Bradford. Widnes Vikings and Bradford Bulls are going into administration. Bradford have gone into administration at least twice, I think 3 times the Bradford Bulls. London Broncos having to go part-time is another big story because of financial issues, as in they just run out of money. They weren't badly run, they just didn't have enough cash. But the Bradford Bulls and the Widnes Vikings, I've done a video on the Widnes Vikings going into administration, and the Bradford Bulls situation where the RFL now own Odsal, and their situation and their struggles in the last decade or so are well documented. And I think you could chart Bradford Bulls, Widnes Vikings financial issues with the decline in quality in rugby league, in the Super League and Champions League One, in comparison to the NRL in Australia. I think you definitely compare the financial woes of those two clubs and the decline of rugby league in the UK with the golfing class that I think is present right now between the domestic competition in Australia and the domestic competition over here. You could definitely argue that as the case, and argue quite successfully. In regards to certain teams getting away with it, I think, the weak governance and I think the club power dynamic, the bravery those clubs had in trying to forge the European Super League tells you all you need to know, in my personal opinion, about how weak the governance side has been for so long. And it was fan power that brought the club back to reality. It wasn't the threats from the FA or anything like that. It was the fans basically standing outside Stamford Bridge and the Etihad with some rather angry scenes. But it was the Chelsea protest that I think really sped up the collapse of the European Super League plan. Plus the failure to get the German and French clubs to sign up to the proposal. And then very quickly that fell apart. But it does show you that the weak governance in place made the clubs very brazen in their attitude and their plans. And most of those clubs, apart from Tottenham, have got overseas owners. And there's definitely been pushback about who buys football clubs, where the money comes from, and what owners' plans are. Now, if the Derby takeover from this American family goes ahead, Mike Ashley's on the table as well, but I swear now Derby fans will not want Mike Ashley in charge. No, the big six, I don't think, are in a healthy state. None of them made a profit last year. The year before, Chelsea was the only one to make a profit, partly because they had a transfer embargo in place. So they could only sell players. So out of the big six, none of them made a profit last season at all. The season before, the only one of the 12 clubs that signed up for the European Super League, Chelsea, made a profit, and a very small profit at that. So if they were standalone businesses, they are all making a loss right now, which tells you something. Now, in the case of things like Man City and Chelsea, and Man United, their owners do have other interests, same with Tottenham. So they can actually afford to cover their losses from other parts of their business empires. But no, they're not in a healthy state, not at all. Um, not in the slightest. Now, Tottenham is in a state of their own making, with the stadium rebuild being over budget, delayed, um, not winning any silverware might have a thing to do with it, poor transfer policy, and a whole host of other issues. Man United, the Glazers leveraged their purchase of the club. That's gone down like a sack of shit, basically, is the best way to describe the ownership of Man United. So there's a lot of debt with the Man United ownership group, with the Glazer family. But their takeover model has, there's question marks now about whether that should have been allowed at the time back in 2004. But all the big six, if they were standalone clubs and just standalone without the support of wealthy owners or the ability to get loans leverage, all of them technically would be in administration. All of them would be docked points. So yes, you could definitely argue that the so-called big six, none of them are in a healthy financial situation, but they claim they are. They may be very valuable brands. The brands might be quite valuable, but actually on a business plan, they're not making money. Which again, you have to ask the question about how badly mismanaged they are. Yes, the Buccaneers. Yeah, not the most successful NFL franchise. 2 Super Bowls, just 2. The rest of the Tampa Buccaneers' history has been pretty crap. So they're not very successful there either. And you look at the amount of success they've had pre-Glazers at Man United and then post-Glazers at Man United, and there's a definite trend of a downward spiral regardless of how many trophies. Under the Glazers' ownership, Ferguson and then Van Gaal, Mourinho bought the club. And you could class the charity shield of David Moyes, but you actually see less success over time. They're not winning as much silverware. And in the last 7, 8 years, they've won 3 or 4 pieces of silverware, one every 2 seasons. And it's a noticeable trend with Man United that they've become less successful with the Glazers' ownership. They were still winning trophies, sure. They were still winning Premier Leagues, FA Cups, Champions Leagues have obviously been won in there. So yes, silverware is still coming to the club. At the same time, it is less frequent silverware coming to the club, and that is a noticeable trend. Same with Arsenal, under the Arsenal ownership with the new Emirates Stadium. 3 FA Cups since they've changed from Highbury to the Emirates. 3. 2 under Wenger, 1 under Arteta. Only won 3 trophies since 2006. So again, the success on the field is not replicated with the so-called big six, because you look at what they've won on the field and the success is less. The 2 sides I think to have the most consistent success, obviously, is Man City and Chelsea under their current owners. It's been pretty consistent, although Man City had a lot of missteps along the way before they actually became consistently successful. So money doesn't buy you instant success. Who would have thought? Liverpool have had trophies under the current ownership, but under Klopp, they have definitely improved. The Gillette and Hicks ownership, there was trophies in there, but they have become more successful. It's about can they continue to maintain that success. Tottenham have won nothing. Since Ferguson, their only trophies are the Shield, which is a one-off, Europa League and the EFL Cup. Yeah, I think they won the FA Cup in there as well. I think they won 2 trophies under Van Gaal and they won 1 trophy under Mourinho. But yeah, they've not had a full trophy cabinet since Fergie left. It shows a good job of Ferguson. It's the structures behind the scenes, not on the playing field, but behind the scenes in player recruitment, player development, scouting, and then the management side of the football club. There's a lot of people in positions that contradict each other behind the scenes. And Mourinho's come out when he was discussions about the Everton job, and he was like, "Why would I want to go to a badly run club with shocking owners? I'll go back to Man United." So Mourinho's not held his tongue in regards to his views on the structures of ownership and management. at the club. Now, the Chelsea situation, they change managers quite frequently, but the structures are more streamlined behind the scenes, which is why they can consistently be successful over a long period with multiple managerial changes. But yeah, Mourinho's comments, whether they're taken in jest or not, about Everton and Man United, mediocre club with poor ownership and off-field structural issues, I'll go back to Man United. I think that tells you all you need to know about how Man United is run behind the scenes. Make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. But it is clear that getting rid of Solskjaer and replacing with Ranić as a temporary is not the solution. It's also clear that Solskjaer wasn't the problem. Because you don't go from second in the Premier League to floundering where they are, although they've had a couple of wins in the last couple of games. They're not been convincing. There's clearly unrest within the group. There's clearly players who want out. There's clearly, issues in regards to not just the playing squad, but how the club is managed off the field, the managerial structures and the structures within the club behind the scenes. You could argue the same at Tottenham, because there's a reason why Conte wasn't appointed in the summer. There's a reason why he was appointed earlier this season after Nuno was sacked. And again, you could argue the structures off the field with Spurs. I think the best run club in the Premier League is probably Leicester, if we're being honest. Now, I'm being generally honest with Leicester. I think, they're possibly the best run club in the Premier League. And while they're not having the best season this season, in regards to other seasons like last season where they finished fifth, they're still in the FA Cup, and they have a very good opportunity of winning that FA Cup, defending their FA Cup silverware, which is again very hard to do with back-to-back trophies in a knockout competition. If they were to do that, I think that solidifies them as a well-run club. So yes, in regards to Ranić, he's only there as an interim. So how much he actually has a say on the makeup of the squad is very interesting. Now, Sancho obviously, I don't think fits the system they have in place or had in place under Solskjaer either. It doesn't look like he's fitting into the Man United system. But there's other rumours that other players like Martial doesn't want to be there. Pogba, how long is he there for? And Mourinho has been very, very critical of Pogba. Very, very critical of Martial. Very, very critical of Luke Shaw. Not very good in the air, but otherwise a decent player, but not good aerially. Critical of the defensive structures, critical of how the club is run behind the scenes. So Mourinho leaves. Solskjaer comes in. Solskjaer gets them to, a Europa League final and second place finish last season. I wouldn't say that's an unsuccessful season. While not winning any silverware, they were a far more competitive team. They were getting results. They managed to finish second. It wasn't pretty football at times, but they made progress. And they've regressed this season. Now you have to ask the questions why they've regressed and why they're not where they were before. Because Man City and Liverpool had their injury troubles and COVID issues, but they're still in second place. Man City is still in first. Liverpool finished third last season, remember that. You've got Chelsea in there, you've got West Ham in there. So West Ham is the dark horse in the European space. Leicester have dropped back and had a different run of form and a different season, which is crucial. Tottenham and Arsenal, again, look at Tottenham struggling in the last round to overcome Morecambe. They had to come from behind. And Arsenal getting knocked out. Both those sides aren't playing well. Liverpool are through to a cup final. So there's a lot of, Man City may be the most consistent team. They haven't got a great history in the FA Cup under the current ownership, only winning it twice, only once under Guardiola. They're not going to win the League Cup this season. They weren't convincing against Swindon Town. Their winning run's been stopped by Southampton. They had to come from behind to draw level. Could have lost that game. Didn't play well. Um, and there are various weaknesses with that Man City side that I don't think have been fully exploited, but that's another thing. What are my thoughts on England's dismal performance in the Ashes? I'm surprised it wasn't 5-0, to be brutally honest. I think it should have been 5-0. We're celebrating, battling for a draw in the fourth test, like we've won the bloody thing. Um, my take on it. I think there's going to have to be change in coach, captaincy, and vice captaincies. That's Root and Stokes gone from the captaincy and vice captaincy. Selectors gone. I think they need to be replaced. I think the ECB needs to have a massive restructure. But when you've got Jonathan Agnew saying that they should combine the 100 with the County Championship T20 competition and rebrand that, I don't think that's the solution. The 100 is clearly not the solution. It's a gimmick. It's a knee-jerk reaction from an organisation in the ECB that is realising that crowd numbers are dwindling, revenues are falling, gaming crisis, because they chased the greed in 2005. The current TV deal they have in place and it's backfired. There's clearly issues within the culture of the sport in this country with the Yorkshire scandal and how that played out. So there's that backdrop going into the Ashes. There was a lot of negativity, scandal. Definitely issues with the coaching. Silverwood, I think, has got to go. I think the selectors have got to go. I do think that Joe Root and Ben Stokes are not the right leadership for the team. Now, that doesn't leave you a lot of options at captaincy. We've lost Moeen Ali as an all-rounder. Sam Curran and Joshua Archer were injured anyway, so they didn't play in the Ashes, which is a big loss, I think, from batting and bowling lineups of England and fielding. Because Joshua Archer is actually quite a good fielder as well as a good bowler and can bat a bit. And Sam Curran is a good all-rounder who's developing his skills. He's still quite raw, but he's a good young talented player with a very, very, very good future, I think. In all formats of the sport ahead of him. But yeah, Silverwood, the one test he wasn't there because of COVID. We drew. Still put that out there. Ben Stokes coming out and saying there's no interest in the captaincy and he finds team meetings dull, boring. There's no interest in discussions like setting the field, bowling lineups, etc., etc. I question his attitude. All the off-field dramas you get with Ben Stokes, is it really worth the hassle of giving him the captaincy? Joe Root, he's just a schoolboy basically. He's so meek and quiet. He doesn't strike me as an authoritative figure. But then the other senior figures in and around the squads, I don't think stepped up enough until the second last test. The fourth test is where we saw some of the veteran players like Anderson, Broad, and Leach also stepped in as well and basically saved the test from defeat, and they stopped it being a 5-0 whitewash. I don't know what you want to make of that, but that in itself tells you all you need to know. That Jimmy Anderson, that's got to be his last Ashes series. I think it's his last overseas. I think we've got the West Indies next, but I think that is his last tour down under. This will be his last winter touring season. I think this summer is his last summer. I think he retires at the end of the summer. I think Jimmy Anderson is basically done. Stuart Broad's got a couple of years left in it. If he stays fully fit. I don't think he catches Jimmy Anderson and McGrath's bowling totals for wickets. I think he's the third best seam bowler of all time. But I don't think he catches the other two. And that's if he stays fit. And he's still got a 50 in him somewhere. I think Stuart Broad can still bat a bit. But the focus on Stuart Broad now more is bowling, what he brings to the team. He was touted as an all-rounder. He's come out more as a tail ender who can bat a little bit, but basically he's the second strike bowler we have. Um, Obviously, the Curran brothers, they're young, they're talented. I don't think they've finished article, but losing Moeen Ali is a massive blow. I think losing that middle order all rounder is a big blow. Jofra Archer being injured, I think, was a blow, but he's going to be around the Test side for a good 5, 10 years yet. So there's no worry there. But that first Test selecting a spinner when he should have gone with a seamer with Broad. Um, Broad's got Warner's number. When Warner bats well against England, Australia win. When Stuart Broad bowls well against Warner, England tend to win. So omitting Stuart Broad from the first Test set the tone for the series completely. We've got issues at wicketkeeper. We've got issues in the domestic game. And it's more than just the county game, having dwindling attendances and issues there. It's the scandal involving Yorkshire and Essex, but I'm primarily Yorkshire. I guess with the captain, Joe Root from Yorkshire. So that's got to have an impact. I'm going to move back into my normal slot now because that light is starting to annoy me and it's actually affecting the stream a little bit. Anyway. So yes, I think you could argue the off-field dramas in the build-up to the Ashes definitely had an impact, and you could argue that it's not good enough. Quite frankly, and that does come down and to the captaincy and vice captaincy because when Joe Root was off injured, Ben Stokes was the captain, and yeah, um, he doesn't. While there's no doubt that Ben Stokes is one of the best all rounders the game has, and there's no doubt he's a clutch player and get you runs or wickets and field excellently at crucial times in all formats of the game. There's no doubt that Ben Stokes is definitely a clutch player for momentum swings. He's definitely talented. He can definitely bat, he can definitely bowl, he can definitely field. His off-field dramas for me are too much of a red flag um, in regards to being captain, being vice captain, being given responsibility. He has proven he's irresponsible off the field consistently. He has proven that. With the social media content or the nightclub incident, he has proven that his off-field attitude is just not that of someone who would give a leadership role to, because that, in my mind, is rewarding bad behaviour and consistent bad behaviour as well. There's been also allegations of domestic violence as well. So, in my mind, giving him a leadership role would be rewarding bad behaviour on an epic scale by saying, "No, England captain." But I think there's still going to be more drama with Ben Stokes off the field. But I think cricket has that problem where it rewards bad behaviour far too often with players, and they're too easily forgiven for misdeeds. But if that were you or me, wouldn't wouldn't swim. Hope it was well. Yes, everything is well down, I believe. Just had a lazy day, really. I've been in bed all day, quite literally. It's 25 past 8 my time. Basically, the furthest I've gone is my bathroom to go to the toilet. I've not got out the flat. I've been lazy. I've had pizza for dinner. I've had pizza and mozzarella sticks for dinner. Too lazy to go out. Not done a lot. Generally had a lazy day, which I kind of knew I was just tired. So I woke up normal time, like 4 o'clock, and I've literally been in bed all day, just watching history documentaries. So I've had a lazy day. You have a Major League Baseball question, right? I'll do my best to try and answer it. What I do know about the lockout is talks are meant to resume in February. But yeah, crack on with the Major League Baseball question. Let's see if I can answer it. To my best of my ability. I've not seen anything that suggests that the lockout is going to end. Although the preseason is actually meant to start next month. So, Major League Baseball lockout. Let's see what the headlines are saying. Let's see if there's actually any Okay, so the New York Post, only 3 hours ago, their headline is Major League Baseball's top prospects, the biggest victims of the prolonged lockout. Um, Ken Rosenthal on SB Nation, so Softball Nation, goes off on Rob Manfred and the owners over the Major League Baseball lockout. That was a headline 2 days ago. CBS Sports, Major League lockout. Um, here we go. The Major League Baseball Players Association will table a counter offer. So we're now starting to get some progress. So yesterday, the MLBPA will present a counter offer to owners during an in-person bargaining session this coming Monday. The Major League Baseball Players Association will present a counter offer to the owners on Monday, the 24th of January. Jeff Passan of ESPN reports. According to the Athletics' Ivan Drellich, who's written a lot of articles in regards to the Major League Baseball lockout, the counter proposal will be presented on Monday during an in-person bargaining session in New York. This counteroffer would be a response to what was presented to them back on the 13th, which was the last time we heard any kind of offers on the table, the details of which were not met with enthusiasm from the player side. To recap, Major League Baseball owners offered the players of raising the league minimum salary and opening up more money available for so-called Super Twos, players who qualify for arbitration for 4 years instead of the standard three before hitting free agency. Extra draft picks for teams that don't manipulate service time for top prospects in order to gain an extra year of control of, in lieu of simply playing the best players on the big league roster at all times. Further adjustments to the league's previously proposed draft lottery, which would include incentives for teams to stop extreme tanking. In general, the players have wanted more money in the pockets of younger players since the overwhelming majority of players who appear in the majors don't make it to free agency 6 or even close to 7 years. They've also expressed concern about too many teams not putting the best product possible on the field, the tanking and service time manipulation. Typically, oh god, right, okay, go away, stupid McAfee, you're pissing me off. They have also expressed concern about too many teams not putting it. Typically, owner offers of paying younger players more comes attached to offers of lowering the luxury tax. That is, the owners aren't paying the players more in general; they're simply shifting salaries around the player pool. Um, Here's where we stand. Okay, this is the Major League Baseball proposal, gradually raising the luxury tax threshold to 220 million by 2026. Pay for play arbitration system of free agency for all by the age of 29 and a half. Eliminating draft pick compensation for free agents. Expanded 14-team postseason. And that was something that was put on the table, was expanding the playoffs, and draft lottery for the top three picks. The counter proposal from the Players Association raising the luxury tax threshold to 245 million. I will get to your question in a second. I'm just discussing the counter offer here by the Players Association. Free agency at 5 years of service time and age of 29 and a half, or 6 years of service time, whichever comes first. Service time bonuses for all-star game selections, awards, etc. Expanded to 12-team postseason. So both sides want to expand the playoffs. Draft lottery with a market size component. Okay, so opening day is scheduled for the 31st of March, and spring training is set to start in 3 weeks' time. So we'll see if that counter offer is taken up and discussed. But both sides, both the Major League Baseball Players Association and the MLB owners, want to expand the playoffs. So that could be really interesting if that is the discussion point that breaks the deadlock. Both sides say that to reach free agency, you've got to be 29 and a half years of age, although there's a bit of leeway with that. So the free agency cut-off point and expand the playoffs, we may see some movement, but they rejected the proposals that were put on the table. They've come up with a counter proposal. We could just come for tit for tat. Mike Trout is proving himself year after year to be one of the greatest players ever seen, undisputedly. How aware are Europeans of his greatness the past few years? Not gonna lie, I don't know who he is. As I say, I don't. I personally don't follow baseball. I have friends that do, but most of the North American sports that me and my friends discuss are NHL and NFL. So unfortunately, I really don't know a lot about Major League Baseball players. Not that it's shocking. It's just my friendship group is more interested in the NFL and NHL. I have some friends who are interested in Major League Baseball. However, as a European and as an Englishman, if you were to come to my work depot, to my work, and listen to the conversations we have, mostly to do with football. The general sports fan over here is not overly interested in Major League Baseball. Sorry to say, it's not a regular topic around the coffee machine when we're signing in to work. It's not a regular topic in the smoking area before we go out on shift. Um, it's football. It's football. Um, European football, that is. It's not to say that Mike Trout is not a great player, but Major League Baseball does not have as big a following over here as people realise. Um, it's just how it is. I mean, occasionally there's discussion about rugby union and rugby league. You know, if there's been a big game on, we have a few northerners because rugby league is a more northern English sport who work down here. Um, and from my point of view, in conversation when it comes to sport, it is football, it's rugby union, it's rugby league, bit of cricket in there, bit of tennis. Obviously, we know about Djokovic and all that situation. But Major League Baseball, it doesn't have as big a following over here as I think Major League Baseball wants because they have got the London series. They tried the London series a couple of years ago to mixed reviews. Um, NFL and NHL and the NBA are streets ahead when it comes to European fans buying into those sports. Um, the NFL London series, while I think it should have run its course personally, I think it's now a cash grab by the NFL. It's been a financial success for the NFL. They've signed a contract with Spurs in regards to White Hart Lane, minimum 4 games a season, two in White Hart Lane, two at Wembley, so 4 games per season in the London series. Um, they got that contract in place for the foreseeable future. I don't think it happens forever, but foreseeable future. The NHL has been taking games not to Europe in the pre-season and regular season for a while now. Obviously, COVID's put a bit of a damper on that, but I can see them returning to that when the pandemic's eased off in years to come. I can see them returning to that overseas European kind of let's take exhibition games, pre-season games, and regular season games on the road to Europe. The NBA has done it as well, taking exhibition pre-season games and regular season games to Europe. Major League Baseball was the last major league to be brave and come over the North Atlantic and be brave in coming to Europe. And it mixed reviews, very mixed reviews. Didn't really, um, you know, uh, go as well as I think they were hoping. Um, but they kept delaying their appearance over here. Then they come over here. And at the time in England, we had the Cricket World Cup. And I think that also overshadowed the Major League Baseball overseas series in London that they had because there was a lot of interest in the Cricket World Cup. And of course, England won that tournament. So they timed it wrong. They could have come a year earlier and they chose to delay it by another year. In fact, 2 years, I believe. They were going to come in 2017 initially. They decided to come in 2019 instead. And I think that had an impact on the product as well. Um, so yeah, Major League Baseball, I think, is behind the curveball in bringing overseas games, be it pre-season or regular season, to Europe, which is the second biggest sports market in the world, I believe, and the home of so many sports leagues that are massive around the world for revenue generated. And you know, very late to bring games over here. In regards to the counter offer that the players associations put on the table to counter offer the league, they've waited 9 days to put forward, or 8 days to put forward the counter offer. The only point where there seems to be reason for hope is 2 points. Free agency at 29 and a half years of age. seems to be agreed upon, and expanding the playoffs, be it 12 or 14 teams, however big the playoffs end up being. Now, there's some talking points there. Everywhere else, they're in disagreement. Now, on regards to free agency, there's still room for some compromise by both sides. And in regards to the playoffs, expanding the postseason, I think that's going to end up being on the table regardless. But the other points in regards to ending this standoff, there's too much disagreement, and I don't think in regards to Major League Baseball we're going to see any movement soon. Um, if they can get talking in regards to free agency and expand the playoffs, and they can find some common ground, which is already, I believe, there needs to be a little bit more compromise on both sides' proposals, but there seems to be room for compromise there, and there is some common ground. Um, we may see a deadlock be broken in regards to talks and getting some kind of resolution in place where they start negotiating in good faith. Um, However, time is ticking. 3 weeks until the pre-season training camps start with the exhibition games and such get played, and players report to camp. Um, and then you have the regular season start in March. So there's not a lot of time. It's the end of January. There's not a lot of time in order to find a solution to the problems. That's something that is very noticeable. Is you know the lack of negotiations, the fact they allowed the CBA just to end, you know, in December, and the fact there's been no discussions really at all, no talks really at all for 2 months. The proposal was rejected outright by the Players Association over a week ago. They put a counter proposal in yesterday, which in itself, there's only 2 points which are worth negotiating on, where there's common ground, and that's free agency with the age limit at least of 29 and a half years, and expanding the playoffs. Which I always said would be a point where there could be discussion, and it's a proposal that I think both sides would have some common ground on. Um, but the longer this standoff continues, the more it looks like the NHL lockout of 2004 2005, and I don't think baseball can financially um, sustain that lockout. I think it'll kill the league personally. It is interesting learning how different sports differ in popularity from continent to continent. No, it's true. Um, it's very interesting. If you were to go to Australia, two sports dominate, and that's Aussie rules. That's the AFL. Check it out, and the NRL, which is rugby league. They're the two dominant um, leagues in Australia. Cricket, obviously, is the dominant summer sport in Australia, which is played right now. Obviously, it's our winter in the Northern Hemisphere. But the winter leagues, which take place in our summer, are rugby league and Aussie rules. And Aussie rules is only played in Australia. Um, that is a Australia only sport. Um, and an AFL, I suggest you watch it. It's great fun. It's highly confusing, I think, to new viewers, but they are superb athletes, absolutely superb athletes. Um, but yeah, it's different. And then you come to Europe, and it's football. Which sport can rival football as the most popular in the world in the next 20 to 30 years? Well, globally, I think there's only one sport that I think can challenge, and that's rugby union globally as a team sport, because it's played on all continents. And America and Canada, so the US and Canada, have got a new professional league that's growing in Major League Rugby. And I wouldn't be surprised if after the next Rugby World Cup in France that they put in a bid. I really wouldn't be surprised. Um, the infrastructure, the sporting infrastructure is in place. The support infrastructure like hotels and and entertainment venues for fans are already in place. They have a Football World Cup. You have a Football World Cup coming up. Rugby union, and I think rugby league, if it was run in the right way, has the opportunity um, to do so. However, it's not run in the right way. But in my opinion, rugby union, uh, I think, is the only international sport that, in theory, could challenge football. But I think football's biggest enemy or biggest rival, I'm going to say enemy, is itself. Um, I think it's too well established for rugby union to really supersede it as the most popular sport. I do believe that. Um, Football's biggest rival is itself. No, I don't think basketball could challenge. It's not played as globally as people think. Yeah, across continental Europe, it's quite popular. Obviously, in North America, it's one of the biggest sports. It's quite popular in Australia. Um, However, it's not really played in Africa, and it's not really played in South America. Football dominates those continents, and population of those continents. There's your battle. And obviously, in the Indian subcontinent, cricket and field hockey, so Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, cricket, field hockey, you've got 1.5 billion people in 4 countries who play two sports religiously. Um, so again, I wouldn't, and basketball is not popular there. So already huge um, population bases, as I'm going to call them, areas of huge population are not interested in basketball, and I don't think have any interest in basketball. Football and rugby union are the most popular sports in Africa because countries like Kenya and Namibia and Zimbabwe um, play rugby union at a decent level. Of course, I think Americans would say basketball. However, on a global rival to football, no. While it's very popular in Europe, especially Eastern and Central Europe, um, and it's very popular in Australia, uh, it's still not as popular as football in those locations. And in Australia, rugby league and AFL far ahead of it in quality, money, sponsorship, participation, youth level participation, um, TV rights, overseas TV rights. Um, tell you all you need to know. And the European TV rights for basketball are interesting. They are bigger on the continent. I will say that. But if you're going to watch basketball, it's going to be the NBA. So if you're a basketball fan in Europe, you are likely to support your home team, absolutely, in your home league if you know are a fan. But if you're going to watch on the TV, it'll be the NBA. If you're going to watch in person, it'll be your domestic league. If you're going to watch the TV, it'll be the NBA. So that tells you what you need to know about how that works. But rugby league and rugby union is a very established secondary sport across Europe and is growing in some markets in Europe. Ice hockey is very strongly established across Europe as well, um, and there's potential for further growth into Asia. Uh, but I think on a global international standpoint, where countries from all the continents play in tournaments globally, rugby union, I think, as a global sport for participation and viewership, is a distant second to football. Now, next 20, 30 years, I think the biggest enemy to football is football itself. And this Qatar World Cup could be the turning point for the direction of the sport because it's the global game. It's very easy to play and it's very easy to participate in football. But the biggest enemy to football is itself. It's its governance. It's where tournaments are hosted. Um, and it's the financial side of the club game that's in crisis, and we've seen that crisis being played out in the last 2 years in England and across Europe. We've seen that crisis be played out very publicly, where this season just gone, Bayern Munich out of the top five leagues was the only club to post a profit, and the season before it was Chelsea. So the pandemic has definitely exposed bad business practices within the sport, poor governance within the sport, poor financial management and financial oversight. And if Derby County go bust, then we really are up creek without a paddle, because that has knock-on implications across the leagues, and not just in England but in Europe as well. Um, and then you look at the situation that Barcelona face themselves in, um, and yeah, there's definitely um, wider implications further afield, more than just Derby County going bust. I don't think the EFL allow Derby County to fail. I think they accept this takeover offer that's on the table from, I think, the Binney family from New England. So it's an American family. They're willing to pay 28 million for the club, which is small by takeover standards, by modern day standards. However, I think the EFL just accept the offer. Um, which would then be a smack in the face for Newcastle fans who had to wait years for the Amanda Staveley Saudi takeover to take place and be cleared, and 18 months of that takeover being blocked by other clubs. But I think it's in football's best interest to keep Derby County afloat. What I find surprising is only one club has actually gone out of business since the pandemic hit, and that's Macclesfield. And yeah, that is surprising. But we do know that it's more than just Derby in difficulty. There are a lot of clubs in financial difficulty. I wouldn't say football is becoming like the NFL and the NBA, which is a license to print money. I think it's just really weak governance that has led to this point. Bearing in mind the difference in styles of sport, North American sport is franchise based, and there's revenue sharing between all the teams in the league. So a team can make no money but be propped up by other teams in the league's revenues. There's revenue sharing. Um, there's salary caps in place in the NFL and the NBA. There's no salary caps in European football per se. There's financial fair play rules that are just not adhered to and not enforced, which has led to Derby County's situation. I'm excited for my college baseball this spring. Do you think we'll have more fan exposure if the ever? Possibly. I will say this about NCAA um, sport. I used to watch a lot of NCAA college football on our subscription sports channels over here in the UK with a good friend of mine who's sadly since passed away. But we used to watch a lot of NCAA ice hockey and American football in winter. Um, and it was I think better viewing. I think the atmospheres were better. I think it was very entertaining because these players aren't the finished product. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. Now, if Major League Baseball is locked out, I do honestly believe one of two things will happen. Fans will want their sports fix, so they may switch to watching the MLS and Major League Rugby. So the other team sports that are taking place in the US summer, which are those sports, those leagues, which will definitely help Major League Rugby keep growing, picking up these disenfranchised, frustrated fans with who want to spend their money. And I don't think Major League Baseball can afford a lockout with the current economic situation in the US. I just don't think long term that's going to be good for some of the small market teams and the smaller market franchises in Major League Baseball. But if Major League Baseball is locked out, then I do believe the NCAA and the minor leagues will get more exposure as well. I do believe that will definitely occur. Um, So that's a possibility. But I also think if Major League Baseball does not come to some kind of agreement, that fans, because baseball takes place in the summer, fans will either tune into the NBA or NHL playoffs because the season's going to start in March. The playoffs for the NHL and NBA start in April. So there's an overlap there. They may decide to watch their local market NBA and NHL team play. That's something that could happen. Um, they will either watch the MLS or Major League Rugby, so other sports that take place at the same time, or they may switch over to watch the overseas leagues, like the NRL, like the AFL, like they did during lockdown in 2020, with record numbers of overseas viewers for those leagues. That is another possibility. And guess when the NRL and AFL kick off their seasons? March. When do their pre-seasons start? Next month. Next month. So there is a massive possibility that sports fans are frustrated with Major League Baseball and they will watch anything to get their sports fix, or they don't return to Major League Baseball. And that is, again, more fans turning their backs on the sport that is clearly struggling with a shrinking, aging fan base. The average age of a baseball fan is older than other sports. The average age of a fan in attendance is older than other sports. And what happens with old people? They die. So there's definitely a lot of issues that need to be resolved. We're ranked number 2 in Division 3 this year. We open against the number one, right. Your team is ranked number 2 in Division 3. I'm assuming that's NCAA. So that's okay, average team. Because I know there's lots of divisions in the collegiate system. We open against the number 1 ranked team who beat us in the World Series last year. We had 1,300 people watching our opening day last year against a bad team. Right. Okay. What I do know is that with college baseball, you've also got the minor league system, which you don't have with NFL. You just have the collegiate system. So there are players who are your age playing in the minors who are playing pro. So that's very, very similar to ice hockey in that regard, and Major League Soccer, so football and rugby union. There's semi-pro teams floating around, and it's not always played at university. In regards to that, we'll see what happens in regards to Major League Baseball. It really is a watch this space, but I do believe if the lockout continues and there is no movement in the discussions, that A, you could lose the whole season, and B, you could lose a lot of fans and other fans, and whether those fans are purely baseball fans and they will watch the collegiate system, such as your team, a player in the NCAA system, and that means go to games or watch on TV, or they turn their attention to other sports leagues in the US and Canada or overseas. And I will put that overseas in there because there was a massive uptick in North American fans watching the NRL and AFL when they resumed back in March 2020. Massive surge, and it sort of kept a lot of those fans watching. There's still a lot of interest in those leagues. Major League Baseball risks losing more fans permanently to other sports and risks alienating its fan base further and the fan base discontent with the league. Baseball is dying, no offense. It's only Major League. It not only is it the only Major League in the US and Canada that doesn't have 32 teams apart from the MLS and Major League Rugby. So I will say Major League Rugby has Major League in its name. So professional sports leagues. The MLS is smaller, Major League Rugby is smaller. However, they're newer leagues. They've only come along in the last 25 years. In regards to Major League Baseball, they don't have a salary cap. Even Major League Rugby has a salary cap. I wouldn't say it was too much about yourself. It's just your team in the collegiate system it could have an opportunity to have more eyes on it because the big boys are being greedy, and that is plain and simple. What this lockout boils down to is greed. Um, what do the Blue Jackets need to take them to the next level besides a better goalie? Yes, the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets. The problem is they've only won one playoff series in their entire history. There's your problem: is getting that consistent, not only playoff appearances but success in the playoffs. Um, and there's your answer. I wouldn't say necessarily about a goalie because I think the league now is more competitive than what it was. But I think the situation in regards to they've lost Tortorella, but they've kept Kekalainen as GM. There always seems to be a lot of roster turnover with Columbus as well. Um, Now, what they need to do to get to the next level, they need to get a playoff run in there and win more playoff games. They are a playoff team. They are a solid side. They're a solid franchise. They're very good at developing talent. Is keeping hold of it, which is a problem. Although some of the trades that Kekalainen has done in the last season and a half, I'm left scratching my head. Um, so they've lost Bobrovsky, Panarin, Foligno, Dubois. They've lost some key players from that team, and um, the Dubois Liney trade. I'm laughing all the way to the bank with that one. I think Dubois has been brilliant for us. I think he's settled in now. But we've had a coaching change with the Jets, but Line hasn't really. Yeah, he's not been as good as he should have been. There's a lot of issues within his game that um, just there's too many deficiencies in his game, um, and he had a good season and a half, and then it's just not been there. And there's question marks about his attitude and his professionalism and fitness and commitment. And his two-way game isn't good enough. But you can have a sniper player, and you can sort of work around that. But definitely a very interesting player in the locker room. Do I think Juve can make top four? As I say, transfer window is still open. And as we've seen with the pandemic, games are still getting cancelled, games are still getting postponed. And there's a lot of question marks about whether, seasons will be shut down or not. And we'll see what happens. But for Juve not to get top four would 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 be almost scandalous. However, their off-field dramas are still ongoing with the investigation into some accounting discrepancies, so they could still be in trouble regardless if they make top four on the field. They could still be thrown out of Serie A at the end of the season. So Juventus have their own off-field dramas regardless of what they do on the field, but I think their era of dominance in Italian football has ended for now. And it's more competitive, which I think is better for the Italian league, and it's better for the European game, and it's better for the national side. And it's always a good thing when the league becomes more competitive because that will draw more eyes to your product, and therefore Italian football can, on a domestic level, reach the heights it had in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, in my opinion. Why is the Metropolitan Division so clumped up geographically while the Atlantic has to go down to Florida, up to Canada, and over to Detroit? It doesn't make any sense to me. Um, Look at the Central and the Pacific, how spaced out they are. They tried different division alignments in the past, and they went to this alignment. Detroit was actually a Western Conference team until the last realignment. Um, so yeah, um, Detroit used to play in the Western Conference. They don't anymore. Um, Part of that is to do with the divisional realignments. We've they've had different division alignments in the past. This was a compromise that was brought up at the CBA. Was divisional alignments. Detroit, I think Columbus wanted to be in the East and not the West, and this was the compromise they came to. So when they moved those teams over from West to East, and then with expansion with Vegas and Seattle, that's sort of the compromise that was come to in the end, quite literally. When you move teams like Detroit over, you have to then reconfigure the divisions and then the conference. Um, Look, I believe those teams in the Eastern Conference are in the right conference. How they make up the divisions, I think that does actually impact the end of season standings. I think it impacts everything. But then you look at the Western Conference, Arizona are screwed with being in the Central, but they have to be in the Central because you can't have 9 teams in one division and 7 teams in another. It just doesn't work. So uh, Arizona has to pull the short straw with its geographical location for travel, but the conference alignments work because it's a 32 team league. Um, that was clearly the compromises made at the last CBA. They knew Vegas was going to join. They knew Seattle was basically going to join. They knew they were going to have 2 teams in the West, basically. So I think I think the NHL knew where they were going to expand to before they even announced the successful bids, being Seattle and Vegas. I think it does for interdivisional play, but that again, you've got to look at where the big geographical population centres are in the US and Canada, and they are in that northeastern corridor, is where there's a lot of cities that have major league franchises. So geographically, you have to look where the population is, and it just turns out to be in that part of the northeast of the US and that eastern part of Canada. Geographically, that's where the highest proportion of cities that have franchises are located and population base. So there is actually a geopolitical sort of geography side of it and population side of it. Um, but yes, the Metro, they could have balanced out the Eastern Conference better with the 2 divisions, the Atlantic and the Metro. They could have mixed up a little bit more. But again, when it comes to divisional alignments and discussions, teams say where they want to be. Teams have a say. Team owners have a say where they have their team. Detroit wanted to go back to the Eastern, um, wanted to become an Eastern Conference team because they couldn't cope with all the travel. I think the division that actually works the best is the Central, quite honestly. The only 2 teams that aren't almost in a direct line in the Central are Nashville and Arizona. All the other states and provinces are in a straight line pretty much. It's Arizona and Nashville that aren't actually in a straight line in regards to the divisional alignment. And the Pacific works quite well as well, with Vegas being the only one not actually on the Pacific coast. Um, it, you could argue you could have 8 divisions of 4 and break it up that way. But then that would alter how you fixture games and the fixture list. And they have tried different division structures in the past. But geographically, yeah, it is a bit of a head scratcher. But again, that's where the majority of the population of the US and Canada is in that corridor on the eastern seaboard and the northeast of the US and Canada. That portion of population and cities that have major league franchises just so happens to be in that location of the eastern seaboard and the St. Lawrence Riverway and the Great Lakes region. It just happens to be where majority of the population and the historic settlement concentration of the US and Canada is it's just how the US and Canada were colonized, and that's how it's ended up. Bit of history and geography mixing in there. But yes, I think the NHL could have done better with the Metro and Atlantic being better spread, a better spread of teams. But at the same time, the Central and the Pacific are done geographically. Central Division, Central Time Zone, and Pacific Time Zone. Um, it does get a bit more difficult on the Eastern Seaboard with the amount of teams in a very small geographical area in comparison to the rest of the league. You just got to. It's the best way they could do it. I think every division has to have a minimum of 1 Canadian team. The Pacific has 3. The Central has 1, and then you've got to try and get the other 3 Canadian teams in 2 divisions. because every division has to have one Canadian team minimum in them. So you have to do one in one and two in the other. It's the only way it's going to work. So that's a part of the problem. Again, that's partly to do with the CBA agreement and on what the owners want as well. The old Northeast division with the Ottawa, Toronto, Boston. Again, yeah, the old Northeast, but again, we like every CBA, and this comes around regularly. The NHL has tweaked the divisional alignment several times, be it the naming of divisions or the teams in divisions. They Arizona being the latest one to move divisions from the Pacific to the Central, and Seattle joining as an expansion team in the Pacific. So the last two expansion teams have joined in the Pacific Division, which has led to divisional alignment changes, and the conference changes where it was an uneven conference balance where there were more teams in the East than the West, and so therefore the NHL knew what they were going to do with expansion before Vegas and Seattle were announced as the expansion teams. They knew where they were going to go with Vegas and Seattle, or teams going to be in the West. They knew where they were going to go. Well, if that's the case, then well, there you go. And that's where I think they need to reassess the alignment of the divisions, because you've got three Canadian teams in the Pacific, one in the Central, and three in the Atlantic, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me when Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa are not on the Atlantic seaboard. It just doesn't. I would have them in the Metro rather than the Atlantic, but again, it's what the team owners want as well. They have a big saying on the divisional alignments. Any divisional alignment changes would have to have two-thirds majority. So when Arizona moved, two-thirds of the owners were happy with that divisional change from Pacific to Central. And it was the logical choice anyway, unless you were to relocate another team and all sorts of relocation. It in regards to the Atlantic, you've got the two teams in Florida, the Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning. You've got the Carolina Hurricanes, the Canes. It does get messy with the Northeast corridor of the US. You know, it, you could argue that that seems to have a favour for those teams having less travel distance than the rest of the divisions. The only way to mitigate that would then be, okay, move a team to Canada and have an all-Canadian 8-team division north of the border, and then refigure out the US division south of the border, where 8 teams, 8 teams, 8 teams. That would be one solution to the problem: is have an all-Canadian division like we did last year in the shortened season, and then reconfigure the other 3 US divisions. Or you could move the 2 Florida teams and Carolina and Columbus, and you could do a bit of chopping and changing there. But I would say, take 3 teams out the Metro, put the 3 Canadian teams in the Metro, and then take those 3 teams and put them in the Atlantic. And yes, you could argue, Florida is a far off. I think the worst trip would be Vancouver, a Canucks fan going to see a Canucks Panthers game in Miami or vice versa. I think that's the worst trip, distance wise. Possibly a Montreal fan going to see a Montreal Canadian Kings game would be the other opposite, or an Ottawa Senators fan possibly. So there's definitely there's definitely some trips that are just ridiculous, but that's what happens when you've got a 2 countries that basically equal a continent in size. So the size of the US and Canada, there's a lot of geography in there, and that has to bear out. But I think the divisional alignments, that's what the team owners want. It's what the team owners want. And and in order for the NHL to make any changes, it would have to happen in the boardroom, and you would have to have two-thirds majority in order to have any changes take place in the league. That includes relocation of teams. That includes any changes that need to be voted on. Two-thirds majority is required. So if you want to see divisional changes, it's up to the owners. It's up to the board of governors to have a meeting and have a vote. And if there is an issue with travel, and it's seen to be an unfair advantage for the Metro over the other divisions in East or West, there you go. I haven't seen fans of any of the Pacific Division teams or Central Division teams complaining about travel um, at all on social media. But I do find it interesting that there's this perceived advantage for the Metro teams over any other division. Um, but the NHL has tried, different division alignments in the past, um, and different conference alignments in the past, and obviously last season with that shortened season where we had an all Canadian division, it didn't actually change that much structural changes to the divisions. A couple of teams had to move, but that was about it. In the US side of things, I think that actually worked quite well having an all Canadian division, but long term, for revenue reasons, you can't have an all Canadian division. You would need an eighth team, which means one of the teams in the US would have to relocate to Canada in order for that to be a viable option long term to have an all Canadian division. What's the most popular? I don't know, quite frankly. Is the short answer to that. I'm a Jets fan. My mate Rob is a Senators fan. My mate Dave is a San Jose fan. My mate Sam is a Rangers fan. Quite. Um, I've seen a fair few fans with Boston Bruins gear walking around. My friend Jamie's a Boston fan. Um, Christ, that's a difficult one. Very very difficult one. I know a Tampa Bay Lightning fan. I think I've seen every single NHL jersey, and this is before obviously Seattle joined the league, and even Vegas, and even with Vegas in the league. I have seen a jersey of every single NHL team in the UK apart from Seattle at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if there are those who buy in and have decided to get hold of some Seattle Kraken gear. I mean, I've got Vegas gear floating around. Um, I wouldn't know what the most. You would have to do a survey. You would honestly have to go on a hockey social media page and do an online survey on Twitter or Facebook. Find a fan group and pose the question, um, and then actually put a legitimate survey. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't think any survey like that has ever been attempted or done personally at any point. Um, and that's an interesting one. I wouldn't know. I've seen every single NHL jersey you can think of, um, and that, and not including Seattle, because obviously I haven't been to a hockey game since Seattle's been in the league. But yeah, I've seen every the other 31 teams. I could not tell you. In my opinion, I wouldn't know. But in my experience, I've seen every single NHL jersey and some non-NHL European and even AA. I've seen ECHL and SPHL jerseys as well. So um, I honestly couldn't tell you. I think it's a fairly even spread. amongst the fan base. I think it's the same with the NFL, and I think it's the same with the NBA as well. I think it's a fairly even spread of fans of teams in my experience. Now I'm probably wrong on that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Rangers and the Maple Leafs, the original six, probably has more fans than younger teams, I suppose, or newer teams. Um, I think the same's you could say with the NBA to a certain extent. No, I don't think they do. Um, I don't. I personally don't think they do. I know a fair few Steelers fans, Green Bay fans, 49ers, Dolphins, Cowboys. I've not seen much to do with the Jags in merchandise, if I'm being brutally honest. I mean, I've got 49ers and Dolphins jerseys in the cupboard. Um, I've had Dallas Cowboys gear in the past. Um, I've not seen any Jaguars beanies or hats or baseball caps or jumpers. I've seen people with NFL, you know, merchandise on, but I've never seen anyone wearing Jags. I think I've seen one person wearing a Jaguars beanie. I've seen one Jags fan. Um, that's it. I've only ever come across one Jags fan. Um, I'm not so sure that they are in as large numbers as the NFL or Saeed Khan would like. Um, I've only ever, yeah, as I say, I've only ever come across one person wearing a Jacksonville Jaguars beanie bubble hat, and that was to do with my job. And he was working for the next council, so the next local authority on the same job I'm doing as in the waste disposal um, for Reading Council. So no is the answer. I haven't seen much. I've seen one person. So that tells you all you need to know, really, in that regard. Uh, yeah, that's basically it. That's generally it, really, in that regard. The effort being put in by the NFL and the ownership of the Jags to try and make them successful over here and try and sell the product, because I do believe at one point they were seriously considering relocating the team permanently over here, um, isn't helped by the fact that the team is shit. And I'm going to drop an S bomb in there because the team is absolute. I'm not so sure that long term the British fan base is going to buy in for only 8 games a year if they were to move the team here for a team that can't win half those games. And what the price of the tickets is going to be, and yeah, um, and the fact that every single team has a fan base over here. Um, yeah, I can't see it. Um, But then again, I'm not the biggest NFL fan anymore. I've really tuned off the NFL in the last 5, 10 years. I haven't watched the Super Bowl for. I haven't watched the Super Bowl for 2, 3 years. I think the last Super Bowl I watched about 5 minutes of it. So I I don't know. I don't know why the Premier League has grown more in popularity with US viewers. Um, There could be a variety of reasons for that. One, there's a lot of American money in the sport in the UK. Two, some very high profile American players either are playing or have played in the UK, which I think has a link there. Three, I think the better performances of the national sides at the Euros and at the World Cup, making the semi final and the final in recent years, I think have contributed, I think, to the growth in viewership. Um, and I also think having less disrupted seasons over the last 2 years in regards to North American sports having reduced seasons or very disrupted seasons and shutdowns. Not since the resumption of play, we have not shut football down. Whereas the NHL reduced season, Major League Baseball lockout, um, loss of disruption to the other major leagues. Um, I think also has an impact when the US sports fan wants to watch sport. Very noticeable when the NRL resumed play, um, and hasn't had a game cancelled since they resumed play last May. The viewership figures have remained strong. Same with the AFL. The viewership figures have remained strong. Um, so I think that has an impact. Especially at the top level. Now English football at the lower levels has been impacted, and there are concerns about the viability of teams. Um, but there could be a multitude of reasons. I don't know what the US. I know NBC has some of the rights. I don't know, what the percentage of live sport shown on US networks is in comparison to the NHL having the ESPN contract south of the border and the new Bailey Sports, which is taken over from Fox Sports with the regional broadcasts. NBA, um, NFL, comparing it to the other major leagues, and I'm including Major League Baseball, the MLS. Um, how much of the sports broadcast? Okay, because you've got NASCAR in there as well. You've got the IMSA GT, endurance racing series of Le Mans style motorsport. You've got the AMA Motocross and Supercross Championship. There's a lot of other sports other than the major leagues over in the US. How much of the TV rights is dedicated to European football, especially the Premier League? And how much, how many games per week do they show, on broadcasts? I also don't want the Jags to move because it's the only team Jacksonville has. It's the same reason the Kings in the NBA won't move. Yeah, I think, yeah, but Jacksonville as a sports location, it doesn't really work. The crowd numbers are terrible, but the team's been terrible, so work that one out. Um, I think they've only made the playoffs like 4 times in their entire existence. Um, they are generally a shocking team. Um, the effort the ownership has put into the London series, they own Fulham. The owners of the Jags own Fulham Football Club. Now, you could argue that their ownership of Fulham Football Club has been a mixed bag of them being a yo-yo team between the Championship and the Premier League. Fulham should be a Premier League side. There's no denying that. Their ownership isn't great. The Ford First versus Ferrari documentary about the Ford GT40 and Le Mans. I've seen snippets and I've also seen other documentaries in regards to Le Mans and you know the birth of like modern endurance racing. I haven't actually seen the full Ford versus Ferrari documentary. However, um, I have seen my fair share of bits and pieces. I've got to make a phone call, so I'm going to leave that there. There's been some very interesting conversation points coming up, obviously in regards to Major League Baseball. I will be constantly keeping my eye on those counter proposals the Players Association Major League Baseball have made to the league. And I'll be keeping an eye if talks do resume because training camp is going to start in 3 weeks. So time is ticking. But thank you very, very much. And I will have some more videos for you very, very soon. For fuck's sake, what do you want to call?